I find the readings this week complex. Yes, the theme woven throughout the readings is prayer. And the responsorial psalm, I think, summarizes what we're doing is praying to God. And the Lord hears the cry of the poor. Maybe in the course of our homily, we'll discover who the poor is. And it's almost like timing is so important for us in the scriptures today. We've just started in New York. My word goes all over through internet everywhere, but in New York, we just started early voting. Voting. God doesn't vote. God expects you and me to live up to our responsibilities and vote. We hear two people in the scriptures today that Jesus points out, the publican and the Pharisee. Now, the Pharisee is a holy person, he thinks. He tells God how holy he is and all the wonderful things he does. He's really a hypocrite because Jesus more than once tells the Pharisees, literally, you are hypocrites. You put burdens on other people, but you yourself don't share a burden. You ride high. You look for places of honor, and the people are below you from your attitude. Jesus talking to Pharisees. The publican, now publicans are real sinners. They're tax collectors, so you and I know they're really sinners. Not really, but as a tax collector, a Jew who is enlisted by Rome, because Rome occupied Israel, was hired by Rome to tax collectors, to tax his fellow Jews, and to collect the tax from those Jews. The coin, and Jesus pointed this out in one of his stories, the coin that is used to collect taxes, the coin of the realm, you might say, had an image on it, and the image was Augustus, the emperor. The Jews had a very serious admonition against images. That's why the temple had no images. It had words, it had decorations, it had the sanctuary, but no images, because they considered it idolatry. Okay? This is pre-Christian. So, handling the coin with the image of the emperor on it was a sacrilege from the Jews' perspective. The publican collected coins. That's what his job was. He was a tax collector. So by the Jews, he was regarded as unclean. It sort of visually plays out in the scriptures when the Pharisee tells God how wonderful he is, and the publican, the sinner, the one who acknowledges that he's a sinner, the one who society considers a sinner, stays in the back of the sanctuary, doesn't even raise his eyes, and acknowledges to God, be merciful to me, a sinner. He's praying. That's a prayer. Anytime you raise your heart and mind to God, is a prayer. So Jesus is giving the two of them to us as examples as how to speak to God and how to look at our responsibilities to society. And let's face the underlying theme of voting. Our responsibility to look at the candidates, whoever they are, and realize that we screw up, we sin all the time. Maybe not every day, 24/7, but we sin. And God always calls us back, always forgives us. No matter what the sin is, if we are sorry and we are repentant, God calls us back. So if we think of those two characters, the sinner, the publican, is being forgiven by God Because he's acknowledging his sinfulness and asking, forgive me, I'm a sinner. The show-off, the narcissist Pharisee, hey, you should see all I do. I'm wonderful. I give people free things. I build them up. I make false promises. And I go to church all the time, temple. And I know the law. He's a Pharisee. They knew the law. But he manipulates the law. And Jesus doesn't like that. Jesus doesn't, pure and simple, Jesus doesn't like hypocrites. Any kind of hypocrite. Religious, political, familial, it doesn't matter. Because it runs against his grain as someone who represents God and who is love. We as Christians are called to be in a relationship with Jesus. And he spells it out. Every time you come to church, he spells it out. What is our relationship going to be? It has to be a relationship of honesty. It has to be a relationship of prayer and a relationship of remembering the underdog, the poor. The psalm says, the Lord hears the cry of the poor. Blessed be the Lord. He hears the cry of the poor. Economic poor? Yes, of course. But so many other people are not economically poor, but behaviorally poor. Screwed up. The narcissist. Screwed up. Because he thinks he's so great, he's really a mess in God's eyes. Now, I'm not judging him. Jesus is. Jesus has given us this example. And we learn from the examples of Jesus and we apply them to ourselves. And as we continue in our culture, we realize that we are in a culture of have and have-nots, and the Israelites were also in that culture. Most people had nothing. So when the psalmist, going back to the Old Testament, going back to the book of Sirach, going back to maybe 150 years before Jesus ever came on the scene, the book of Sirach, the author is telling us, one who serves God is heard, and his prayer, his petitions reach heaven. So the person who acknowledges ourselves, we acknowledge who we are before God, our prayer reaches heaven. Even if it's a prayer of asking for forgiveness. If we acknowledge our sinfulness, acknowledge we haven't done as good as we can as Christians, our prayer is like a direct line. I'm always impressed with, now once in a while you see it on TV, the advertisements between our grandparents and ourselves as far as in the realm of communications, how grandpa used to make a phone call, but they had to talk to the operator had to connect us, and after the connection was made, you could call. I'm thinking long distance between here and Europe, or even locally. We could make a phone call, but there's no guarantee the recipient is going to pick up or know who's calling. We dial and it rings. Now, immediately, I can call relatives in Ireland or Italy, and it'll be a little harsh on them because of the time difference, but they can pick up immediately. Our direct access to God is faster than that. All we have to do is speak to him in our minds and hearts. Direct access. So that publican, the known sinner who comes to the synagogue and stays in the back, doesn't raise his eyes because he's too mortified by his sinfulness, God hears immediately. Because not only is God hearing his words, God is hearing his heart. And the show-off, the Pharisee, who promises everything, who delivers nothing, who loves himself above all, that one not speaking for God, but I'm sure God closes his ears to that person because he's not praying. See, prayer is going to God. Prayer is not coming back to me. I'm not praying so that you can appreciate how wonderful I am. That's not a prayer. That's an advertisement, what the Pharisee was doing. The publican prayed humbly before God, acknowledging who he is, and that's us. We acknowledge who we are. I don't care what you want from God, what you ask of God. Lately, I've been in prayer, especially. I have a prayer list I carry and add people to it as I would get requests. And lately, I've had prayers for people who is undergoing cancer, someone who just went through AFib and is still recovering, someone who's going through studies, sleep studies, someone who's going to another group of medical procedures, all calling or texting or speaking to me and saying, could you pray for me? Now, they're coming to me only because I'm one of you, and we all can do the same thing. We become conduits. We become ways of getting to God. So asking someone to pray for me is acknowledging, one, God, two, my dependence on God, and three, my relationship to you and our relationship to each other. Now, those people who are sick, and there's so many on my list, and your list as well, they're not worse off than we are spiritually. God hears them and acknowledges their dependence on him. When they bring others in, us, to pray with and for them, God hears that. He hears your prayer on behalf of your aunt, your uncle, your mother, your father, your children. God hears that. But if we tell God, I have the best kid, I have the best mother, I'm the best person, I can just see God covering his ears. Remember how we used to do when we were kids? I don't know if the young kids do it now. You know, when mom and dad are speaking and you close your ears so you hear every other word. I have an image of God doing that when the narcissist thinks he or she is praying, and actually they're not praying. They're just trying to tell you how wonderful they are. Prayer is the theme. And speaking of Jesus, looking at the narcissist who loves himself and believes he does no wrong, we compare it to the poor man. That's why the psalmist says the poor are heard by God, as long as we honestly lift up our hearts and voices to God. And let's not get caught up with the economic poor. Yes, absolutely. It's our responsibility to not only pray for them, but support them. And that's what our whole church ministry has always been about, taking care of the poor, the financial poor, but also the economic and socially poor. Your example, my example, can be a prayer. As we mentioned, God doesn't vote, but he knows what you're voting for and who you're voting for. And he reads our intentions. Why are we voting for this particular person? Is it for his narcissism and his empty promises, or his serious attitude toward, in this case, fellow New Yorkers? Serious attitude toward the poor. Not just dangle something like a trophy or a bait in front of any of us so we can vote for him, but getting down and dirty and working together as New Yorkers, as Americans, as Catholics. Honestly, admitting our dependence on God, not telling God how wonderful we are, but asking God to build us up as a city, state, nation, and church. Today we emphasize the dependence that we have on God in our prayer. October is the month of Our Lady of the Rosary. And Father Mike is determined to keep the statue of Our Lady here in the sanctuary. Later on, the music minister will be singing the Ave Maria. Goes back to our history of speaking to God. Even Mary, as a bigger deal as she is in our faith, didn't regard herself as a big deal, even when the angel Gabriel said, "You are going to be the mother of God." Now, if you're Italian, especially an Italian boy, all our mothers thought they had God as their son. Mine certainly did. My grandmother, of course. You were a boy in an Italian family. You're God's gift. But we had to grow out of that. But when the angel says to Mary, "You are going to be the mother of God," she doesn't say, "Of course." She doesn't say it was about time. She said, I'll do whatever you want. I'll be your servant. Whatever God wants, His will be done. And Jesus picks that up in His Lord's Prayer when He prays, "Your will be done." Through us, through our prayer, through our action, through our voting, God's will be done.